if we only do this practice, there can be a danger that we can become quite self-absorbed, and we could use this practice as a way of withdrawing from the world. That's not very healthy. So to make sure that we don't do that, to have balance, the session after lunch, we're going to do these practices of loving kindness, compassion, and so forth. So that will be from 2 till 3:15. And then we'll have an afternoon tea break, again for half an hour, 3:15 to 3:45. And then 3:45, there'll be 1 hour yoga session, again with Sippy, and that'll be in the same hall. Very important, this 1 hour yoga, because not only is it a way of making our body more flexible, but it really can be very helpful in setting up the body to support the meditation practice, to balance the energies in the body. So we'll have, because we're doing 10 days, so it's important to do some body work to support the practice. So that's you'll find that very, very helpful. So that will be from 3:45 till 4:45, and then just a short 15-minute break to transition to back here. From 5 till 6, we'll be doing another session in here for the meditation. I'll be leading that, of course. 6 o'clock will be dinner, and then 7:30 evening session for about an hour, hour and a half. So that's the program then for the 8 days, and then on the last day, again, we'll start with a meditation before breakfast, and then after breakfast, Dharma friends will do a sort of a wrap-up session till about 10:15. We'll have a tea break, short tea break, and then from about 10:30 till 12, I'll have my final session where I'll talk a lot about how to integrate these practices into daily life, and also some more general advice as well. And we'll be finishing at 12 o'clock on the last day. So that's the schedule. Now, the next 2 mornings, there won't be a yoga session in the morning before breakfast, so you'll get a little bit of a sleep in tomorrow and the next day. So the wake up will be at 6:30, and we'll just do the morning meditation session. But then starting on Sunday, then we'll be wake up at 6 o'clock. Okay. Any questions about the schedule? Anything's not clear about the schedule? Okay, so the course materials, you should all have a copy of this now, so we'll be referring to this from time to time throughout the retreat, so you won't need to talk about the materials now. And also during this retreat, I'll be referring to a book called Attention Revolution by Alan Wallace. It's a book on this Shamatha practice, the main focus of this retreat. So I'll be reading a little bit from that book from time to time to introduce some of the practices as well. So that's the schedule. And in terms of, in the Shamatha practice, of course, we're focusing on a particular object to develop our attention skills. So for the first 3 days, we'll be using the breath, variations of the breath practice. I'll be talking about each one of those variations. On day 4, we'll be switching to observing the mind as the object. Day 5, we'll be doing what's called resting in awareness as the Shamatha practice. And then on day 6, we're going to combine those two practices of resting in awareness and then observing the mind. So I call that stillness in motion. So we'll be doing that on day 6. And then day 7 and day 8, you get to choose which object to focus on. So those 2 days are to help us to go a little bit deeper into the Shamatha practice. And for those 2 days, you can use object of your own choice. So we'll be presenting the various objects for the first 6 days, and then the next 2 days, you pick the one you'd like to work with, and we'll go deeper into that. And on those 2 days, I'll be doing less talking and we'll be doing more meditating. So it gives a chance to go a little bit deeper into the practice. And then on day 9, I would like to move into discussing a little bit what's called the Vipassana practice, the wisdom practice. because this Shamatha practice is sort of the basis for that. So we'll get a little bit of a taste for that in day 9. And as I said, in day 10, we'll be looking at how to integrate these practices into daily life and some general advice as well. Also, what I'll be doing is in the evening sessions after dinner, I'll be having some more general discussion about the framework for this, particularly for this practice. So we'll be looking at some concepts within Buddhism that gives us the sort of the framework for this practice. And so we'll be going through things like what's called the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma, the 4 noble truths. I'll be looking a little bit at Mahayana and Vajrayana, and briefly touching on what I call the 4 philosophical systems in Buddhism. And then also I'll be looking at the frameworks or the models that are used in the Shamatha practice to describe the stages of progress in this practice. So I'll be looking at that a couple of evenings, and then also be looking at a model for the Vipassana practice one evening as well. So these are the sort of the framework for this, around this practice we'll be looking at in the evening session. So that's the main topic for the evening sessions. Now this retreat we're running in silence, and of course we're doing this so that we can get maximum benefit from this retreat. So the silence will start this evening once you go to your room. So I think probably there may be a few of you still need to organise a few things after this session. You may need to see a few people, so that's fine. But then when you go to your room, then we go into silence. And we'll be doing silence from then up until breakfast on day 10. So silence. Now, in terms of my sessions, the morning sessions will be in silence, but the afternoon sessions and the evening sessions, you'll have opportunity to ask questions about the practice. So we'll leave the questions in my class till the afternoon and evening sessions. Morning sessions really quiet, focusing on the practice. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing in terms of the silence. And I very much encourage you to really maintain that silence well. You'll get the most out of this retreat. If you start talking, you're going to disperse your energy, and also, of course, you're going to disturb the people around you. So really maintain that silence well. If you have any issues, of course, about your room or something like that, the toilet's broken or something, you may need to speak to someone, but other than those sorts of things, then maintain that silence and you'll get the most out of this retreat. Okay. In this retreat, if you want to, you can read a bit of material, or maybe if you brought a book, or I don't know, maybe if there's some books available here.
On Saturday evening.
Yeah, so you can read, but I wouldn't recommend reading too much, and trying to keep the reading a little bit related to the practices that we're doing. That may help you better understand the practices. So reading is okay, but not too much. Now, the goal of this retreat, of course, is to simply learn these various practices and, of course, to practice them, and then also how we can integrate them, how we can bring them into daily life when we go home. So that's the goal of this retreat. So if we have an expectation of maybe having some meditative experiences in this retreat, I think you're setting yourself up for a lot of unnecessary frustration. So if we have no expectations, there can be no frustration. So very good. And also to have a very nice and relaxed approach, not to sort of have this uptight, you know. In our modern society, we have this sort of striving mind, you know, we need to get it and we need to get it now. So we tend to push. So we don't really want to do that in this retreat. Stay nice and relaxed, and then you'll get the most out of this retreat. Okay. So that's just some logistics about the retreat. Any questions about any logistic matters before I give a brief introduction into the Shamatha practice? Anything not clear? Okay, so let's now have a brief introduction into the Shamatha practice. So what is this Shamatha? Shamatha is a concentration practice. It's a practice to develop and cultivate concentration. And concentration is coming from the Sanskrit word samadhi. So in this retreat, I'll be presenting off sometimes Sanskrit words. The reason is that these Sanskrit words, of course, that's the original language that these Buddhist teachings were transmitted in. The Sanskrit words have very precise meaning, whereas sometimes the English words are not so clear. So I always like to go back to the Sanskrit and then sort of define what they mean. So concentration, the Sanskrit word is samadhi, and there are many levels of concentration we can develop in the Buddhist path. The one that we're focusing on here in this retreat is called Shamatha. Shamatha, again, is a Sanskrit word, and we can divide this into two parts, shama and ta. Shama means non-discursive. In other words, a mind that is calm, not a lot of activity. Ta means to remain or abide. So shamatha is often translated into English as calm abiding. A mind that is calm and abiding or focusing single-pointedly on an object. So this is shamatha, translated as calm abiding. So often in what's called the Mahayana Buddhist traditions, and we'll look at what that means later, when they talk about concentration practice, normally they say we're doing shamatha practice, because that's the level of concentration we're trying to develop. In other Buddhist traditions, which are called the Theravada Buddhist traditions, and we'll look at what those traditions are later, when they talk about concentration practice in those traditions, you generally won't see or hear the word shamatha. In the Theravada traditions, they often use the word jhana. They often say we're doing jhana practice, but it's the same. Jhana is also a particular level of concentration. So whether we say we're doing shamatha practice or we're doing jhana practice, same. Okay. Now, why do we need to do this practice, this concentration practice? And of course, here we're talking about developing our attention skills. So of course, this shamatha practice is also very beneficial for daily life. Because in daily life, attention skills, or our faculty of attention, is important in everything we do. Because if we can't focus well due to either dullness or distraction, then we're not effective in anything we do in life, at work, at play, at home. Also, that often leads to more agitation and stress. That often leads to more mental imbalance, like attachment, aversion, jealousy, and so forth. And we end up not really enjoying the simple pleasures in life as much as we could. And also, due to a lot of this mental imbalance, we often end up with sleep problems and often some physical health problems as well. So what you'll find through doing this shamatha practice for everyday life is that we'll be more focused, which means we'll be more effective in everything we do in our life, much less agitation and stress, much better mental balance. We'll tend to enjoy the simple pleasures in life much more than we do now, and also probably you'll find better sleep and maybe even some physical health benefits. So that's at a very everyday level. But of course here we're talking about doing this concentration practice in the context of Buddhism. So where does concentration practice fit in the Buddhist picture? In all Buddhist traditions, there are three main areas of practice. The first of those is ethics, in Sanskrit shila. So ethics here, of course, is the foundation. Simply means avoiding any harmful behaviour, avoiding harming others, harmful behaviour in general. And then on that basis, the second practice is the concentration practice, the one we're mainly focusing on in this retreat, the samadhi practice. And then on the basis of developing single-pointed concentration, the third practice is the wisdom practice, in Sanskrit prajna. So wisdom here, we're talking about the wisdom realizing the nature of reality. Because the Buddhist assertion is that it's our distorted view of reality that is the root cause of all of our mental afflictions and suffering. So if we want to overcome our mental afflictions and suffering and find genuine happiness, we need to come to realize the nature of reality. We need to engage in this wisdom practice. This wisdom practice is also often called Vipassana practice, or many of you are probably more familiar with the Pali word Vipassana. So Vipassana is the Sanskrit word, Vipassana is the Pali word. In both of those words, we can divide that into two. Vi means higher. Higher or superior. Passana or pasana means to see. So Vipassana means higher seeing, seeing beyond. Usually this is translated into English as insight. So to gain insight into the nature of reality. So again, the concentration practice here is often called Shamatha practice. So on the basis of Shamatha practice, we engage in the Vipassana practice. So we're going to get a little taste of this on day 9, what that looks like. Most of this retreat, of course, is focusing on the Shamatha practice. Any questions about that? Is it clear? Anything not clear? Okay. So that's where this Shamatha practice that we are focusing on in this retreat, or the main topic in this retreat, fits in the bigger Buddhist picture. One of the 3 core areas of practice. It's the basis for the Vipassana practice. So what I'd like to do now is have a look at how do we go about training in this Shamatha practice. The first point in the Shamatha training is what's called the preconditions, which is talking about how to set up in our life in such a way that is conducive to this practice. And this is very important. We're going to look at this on day 10. And this is often where, in some modern traditions, this sort of gets left out. Because one of the key elements in the Shamatha practice that we're doing, of course, is idea of mindfulness. So mindfulness, of course, is very popular now in the modern world, even becomes somewhat trendy. And unfortunately, some of the modern mindfulness movements, what they've done is they usually get mindfulness from Buddhist context, but what they often do is they take mindfulness out of Buddhism and they say, yes, this mindfulness thing, that's very good, I like that. But all this other stuff here, well, no, I don't know about that, that's all that religious stuff, we better sort of throw that out. So they end up with what's called bare mindfulness. And that's all you get presented, bare mindfulness. And they often present it as like the magic pill of mindfulness. You take the magic pill of mindfulness and all your problems will go away. They won't, in fact. In fact, if you just take bare mindfulness, not only won't your problems go away, they may get worse. Because particularly if we have a dysfunctional lifestyle and we add mindfulness to that, we may just become better, more focused at cheating people, deceiving people. And then our actually problems will increase. So therefore, preconditions, and also another point here, integrating in daily life is very important. We need a framework for shamatha practice, for mindfulness practice. If we don't have a framework, mindfulness is not only not effective, it could actually just amplify, make your problems worse. So we're going to look at how to avoid that through these preconditions and how to integrate in daily life. So we'll look at that on the last day. Then the actual shamatha practice. The actual shamatha practice, of course, has two parts. In fact, all practices have two parts. One is meditation, where we're internalizing. And the other part of every practice is what we do for the rest of the day. How do we integrate or bring that into daily life? And often, again, this gets left out. So often people, when they do certain practices, they may meditate every morning and maybe even half an hour or an hour. But then what often happens is when they finish their meditation, they jump up and run around like crazy for the rest of the day as they normally do. And then, of course, 30 minutes of mindful meditation versus 14 hours of mindlessly reacting, which one of those is going to win out? So, therefore, if we want any practice to be effective and progress, not only do we need to have a daily meditation practice, but we need to integrate that practice into daily life as well. So we're going to look at that also on the last day, how to do that integration. That's on day 10. And then meditation also has two parts. There is the preparation and the actual meditation. And this is also where often people find themselves not very effective in meditation practice. Either they don't do the preparation or they don't do it well. So we need to make sure at the beginning of each meditation session that we prepare ourselves well for the actual meditation. And preparation is in terms of preparing body, speech and mind. And we'll look at how to do that preparation shortly. In the actual meditation, the actual Shamatha meditation, we're going to look at 4 things in this retreat. First is, what qualities are we trying to cultivate in this Shamatha practice? What object should we focus on in this practice? What tools do we use for this practice? And what sort of faults can come up in this practice and how do we overcome them? So we're going to look at those 4 points. And then the other thing we're going to look at in the Shamatha training in this retreat is the stages of progress. Because in any practice, it's very useful to have some roadmap of understanding how do we know if we're progressing and what are the various stages that we go through in a particular practice. So here, in the Shamatha training, we're going to have a look at that in some of the evening sessions a little bit later in the retreat. What stages of development or progress do we go through in the Shamatha practice so we can know if we're heading in the right direction and how far we've got in this practice. So that's coming in the evening sessions later in the retreat. What I'd like to do now then is briefly talk about preparation, preparing body, speech and mind, and then we'll do a short meditation where we go through each one of those steps in a very methodical way, so we become familiar with them. So in terms of preparing the body, of course we're talking about posture, setting up a good posture for meditation. 2 things are most important things in posture. One is to keep the back straight, because if the back is like this, probably we're going to get very drowsy, sleepy. So we need to keep the back nice and straight, and at the same time we want to let the body be completely relaxed. These are the 2 main points. But just a few details about the posture. First, what to do with the legs. Generally in the Buddhist tradition, they say the best posture with the legs is the full lotus. You have either leg, foot on top of the other thigh. Most of us in our modern society are not very flexible, can't really do that. So another option is the half lotus, where you have one on top and the other one underneath. So a little bit sort of like that. But many of us also not very flexible can do that. So then often most of us end up sitting cross-legged like this. That's okay. But many of us also tend to be quite not very flexible in the groin, hip or knees. So when we sit cross-legged, we often end up sort of sitting here like this a bit, our knees sticking up in the air. That's not very good for 2 reasons. One is it's not very stable, you're moving around a lot. And also sitting like this is because we're not very flexible and we're probably putting a lot of strain on the lower back and maybe even the groin as well. So what we want to do is, if we're not very flexible and when we sit cross-legged the knees are sticking up in the air, we need to get more cushions, sit on more cushions, raise us up so that the knees go down and they're at least level with the hips, but ideally the 2 knees touching the cushion, because then we have 3 points of contact and that's very stable. You can, if they're not really touching, you can also put something a little bit under each knee. Particularly sometimes when people sit like that, cross-legged, they sort of cut circulation and one or both legs go numb. Then we can sort of adjust that, maybe even put a little cushion between the legs to help overcome that. Another thing we can do, if that's the case, is instead of sitting cross-legged, you put one leg in front of the other. So instead of crossing, you simply have one leg in front of the other. That's also very good, and that also helps the knees go down as well. So again, just sitting on enough cushions so the knees are not sticking up in the air. Because also if they're sticking up in the air, to keep the back straight, we're probably